Hi, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. It's Russell with Ink and Paper Blog, and today we're here to talk all things Booker 2022. And I'm here to welcome back Bernie, who is going to give us his opinion on this amazing long list. Welcome back, Bernie.
Hi, Russell. Thanks for having me.
Bernie and I are on two different time zones. It's like the middle of the day there, and I'm still drinking coffee. So hopefully my brain will catch up with this before this video is over. So I thought we would start with a couple things. One, what we felt about the list in its entirety. And then we'll sort of go through each of the books, giving our ideas about them and whether the reason we think they could make the short list and the reason they couldn't. And then we'll pick our short list at the end. So fair warning, this video may be a little bit longer than my normal videos because I'm sure we're going to have a lot to say. So let's get started. Overall, Bernie, I think it's a fantastic long list. How about you?
I do too. I agree. It's different than, it's very different from last year's, but it's a great list.
It is. Did you have any initial thoughts now that you've gotten through almost all of them where you could sort of see some themes going through them?
I think that the thing that stands out to me about this list this year is that they are all so different. I think that the judges were thinking about that when they created this list. They wanted like a little bit of everything. And I think that's and also they all of the books seem to have like strengths and weaknesses. Whereas like last year, I feel like there were a few that I thought were like blew it out of the water on all fronts. I don't necessarily feel that about this year's list, and I think it might have to do with their focus on like, you know, the diversity of styles.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of really, really good books on this list. There's one I think is like almost perfect, but most of them I do see some error, some things that I would like to change about them. A lot of the books have like this one historical moment in the world of the author that sort of centers a lot of them, you know, and defines not only maybe the people, but also the country that they come from, which I thought was really interesting. And that's consistent through them. And many of these books play with style and form in really unique ways. Some, I think, more successfully than others. But I thought those were the two things that really stood out with me because one, I had to look up a lot of historical context to make sure that I was understanding what the author was doing. And two, I would just get mesmerized by what some of them were doing on the page, which I thought was really, really interesting. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. And now that you say that, like I'm looking at the books and they all do really have a strong sense of place. Like,
yes,
like, absolutely.
Yes. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go in alphabetical order to start and give our thoughts and then go from there. The first then book would be Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo. I'm trying to say her name right. I got some feedback. I did that wrong in the last video. Glory is out by Viking here in the US. And so this is a retelling of an actual historical event that occurred in, I think, 2017, in Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe, is that how you say his name? Removed from office, and ironically, a very similar group of people come into power. But it's told from the point of the view where everybody in this imaginary country is actually an animal. And this was a book that was quite diversive when you talk to people who read it from the long list. What were your thoughts initially?
I really liked it, but I also struggled with it because of its density. But yeah. Like if I put on my like enjoyment mind, I wouldn't rank it high. But if I put on like my trying to be a judge and like really assess it mind, I would put it really high.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. At times I found it a little bit impenetrable. And there's a point in the narrative when a character comes in returning to the country, which I thought was a real turn. I think the book turned there and became more of a story versus sort of this farce that was going on. And interestingly enough, a lot of people sort of discuss whether or not the characters had to be animals and why that was. Did you have any thoughts on that?
No, to be honest, not really. I thought it worked. I know that a lot of people, or not a lot, but like I've heard people who struggled with it at first or who might not have thought it worked, but I thought it worked. I think I did catch myself at times like not really remembering what kind of animals all of the characters were, and so I didn't necessarily picture them in my mind as animals, and maybe that's like, I don't know, maybe that's a negative, but I don't know, it didn't really bother me.
So there's a couple of books that in this list that are heavy satire, right? I mean, like heavy. And I think in this book, if these characters had been people, this story may have been a little bit more run of the mill. I think in making them animals, it becomes so far out there. You realize you're laughing at a situation that is actually steeped in realism. So it's really interesting. I think it was an important narrative choice to sort of make us think, oh, this is absurd, and then realize it's not so absurd, it really happened.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, no, definitely. That's really great. Yeah.
So why do you think it will be on the long list?
Yes, I do. Oh, you said on the short list?
So why do you think it would make the long list?
Oh, okay, yeah. Because I think that it's one of the more ambitious books on the list. And I think although there is maybe a slight disconnect because of the density of the book, I think that it's mostly successful in what, I mean, I seem to imagine it's trying to do.
I totally agree. I think that it's a book that has something to say, something important to say. And once you sit down, it's one of those books that, I mean, you as a college professor, your class could tear this book apart for an entire semester.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's so many layers and stuff to it. But I do agree. I think the density is the sort of the biggest impediment to the shortlist. But I think as judges, they are not going to have any issues.
Yeah, and I tried to think about this while I was reading it, because I agree with you about that one character. When that character comes in, that's when the story really, I think, takes off. And so I asked myself whether the book should have just focused on that one character, but I think it would be a completely different book, and I don't think it would work if it were just her.
Yeah.
Or in the way.
I totally agree. I think we need the front to get to that part of it. And I was amazingly emotionally committed to this book once things started to sort of happen. So
there are moments in this book that
yes. So real quick, that was Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo, and that is only the first book, but I told you this video was going to be long because we have a lot to say. So the next book on the list is Case Study by Graeme, Macrae, Burnet, and this is actually not out in the US yet. This is only out in the UK. And wow, you know, it's so interesting how this cover looks on my camera right now. It's so crazy. So this is the story of a woman in 1965 London. Her sister has died, and it is ruled a suicide. She believes that her therapist had something to do. So she creates an entire identity in order to visit and sort of infiltrate this man. And what the implications of sort of this dual identity and her realizing who she is when she's not pretending versus when she is pretending. I'm going to be honest, when I started this book, it surprised me. I did not expect to like it as much as I did, but it is really engaging in the beginning because it rotates between these journals and then also sort of like this historical nonfiction narrative of the professor or the psychologist himself. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to really get into this. And I really, really got into it. It is rather entertaining.
Oh, good. I'm excited. This is one of the two that I haven't read, but I'm starting it right after this video. So I'm excited. So my weekend's gonna.
Yeah. So I will say, you know, he has made the shortlist before. I think his prior book is stronger. If I say why this book will make the shortlist, it would be because it's got sort of this elevated literary thriller thing, which I think it's so different than every other book on the list. And I sometimes think the booker likes to champion something that's taking genre fiction and making it sort of next level. And then the reason I think that it will maybe not make the shortlist is the ending, which I'm not going to spoil anything. But if you've talked to anyone who's read the book, the ending is sort of, did he kind of know what he wanted to do sort of thing. So, but it is, I 100% recommend it. I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, case study, Graeme, Macrae, Burnet. And I ordered that one from the UK, and you can too, if you want to read it. So you can definitely get it. And I think my friend actually got it somehow on a library app. So I think if you're one of those digital library people, you can get it as well. Okay, so the next book, which someone told me in a comment the other day, is the most derisive book on the list, which I was rather surprised to hear, is Trust by Hernan Diaz. An investigation into the accumulation of wealth in America from the 1920s on, told in 4 different sections, all a different type of book form. One's a novel, one is an autobiography, one is like a memoir, and one is a journal. This book blew my mind. So have you had a chance to finish? You finished this one, right?
Yeah, I've read this one. Yep.
Okay, so tell me your thoughts.
Okay, so I really liked this one. I kind of anticipated that I would before I started, just based on what I know of the author. The people who love him, I seem to like relate to or have similar tastes with. But yeah, no, I feel like out of all of the books on the list, this is the most perfect, I would say, the most perfectly constructed. Like, but it's also it's super deceptively simple, I think. But when you actually like sit back and think about all of the little small parts that like went into crafting this novel that just really works, is so incredibly impressive. So I definitely, not to jump the gun, but I definitely think this will make the short list because of that. I would say the one I would say downside to it is that in its structural perfection, I think it lacked a little bit of like emotional connection. It's not a book that you're gonna like feel super connected to the characters, but it's so impressive. So I definitely think that it needs to be recognized.
So I totally agree. And I think that that's been a lot of the feedback about Trust, is this idea that you're not connected. But for me, I feel like Hernan made that strategic choice because we're not connected to money in any sort of emotional way, right? So if this had been some sort of oozy, super sympathetic narrative, it gets away really from the point that he's trying to make. But I will say, I think the last section, there were parts of that where I really felt he gave the wife a voice that was rather emotional at times. Sort of that idea of losing your sense of self is really powerful. And as right now in America, like, there's so many of us are struggling with inflation and gas prices, and everything we buy is going up. So money is always in our thoughts. So I just thought it also has this timely aspect to it in a lot of ways. But he is a fantastic writer.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. So I think you've really said why we think it will be on the shortlist. I think maybe if the judging panel is not as connected to it emotionally, maybe it falls off. I don't see it.
It's really, it's like, it's a piece of art. It's a piece of art. Art isn't always emotional. It's a piece of art. And yeah.
Well, and I think that it's one of those books that when you turn that last page, the reward of having read the whole novel is so satisfying. So yeah, it's so very good. So the next book on the list, very different, is The Trees by Percival Everett. And I have to say, this is a satire. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is a murder mystery set in Money, Mississippi, where white men are being found murdered. There is a connection to the Emmett Till murders that occurred here in the United States. I have a hard time talking about this book. This is probably the second closest to perfection on this list to me, because it gets so satirically absurd that you're at a moment sort of questioning why he's doing what he's doing. But if you put it in context to the historical relevance to the United States, this book, it says exactly what it needs to say. So you've read Percival before or no? Was this your first one?
Yeah, I read his novel Erasure like over a decade ago, and okay. I remember really enjoying it. I can't say much about it, but I remember.
What did you think of The Trees?
I loved it. So this is the one book I think that like I'm still thinking about the most since reading it. When we talk about like the 6 that we predict, I'll say more on it, but yeah, this one is one that's has really stuck with me. I just find the writing of satire so impressive. The story like, because there's always a chance with satire that it comes off as off-putting, but it doesn't. It had me so engaged. It had me laughing, but so much, but it's so dark as well. And I think it's hard to to bring those two together and be successful. And I think that he does that really, really well. This one blew my mind, probably the most out of any of them.
Yeah, this one, for a book that is so satirical, there are also people in this book that I will never forget. And I think that that's really impressive, because sometimes in satire, the characters can just become vehicles for conversation versus actual people. And that does not happen in this book, I don't think. I think that he's just so masterful of the layers that go on. And at times I was laughing out loud and then realizing how I should probably be crying because it's so terrible. But it's really, really impressive. This is just a total aside. Expect to see this on the National Book Award long list coming out in a couple of weeks. I can't imagine them passing it up. So yeah, fantastic book. Why do you think, if we are talking about why it may not make the shortlist?
Okay, so I definitely think it's going to make the shortlist. Like this and Trust are the two I think are the easiest. Actually, no, the 3 that we've talked about I think are the 3 that I'm convinced are going to make it. Trees, Glory, and Trust. I think that if for some random reason, not random, but for some reason it didn't make it, I think it would be because writing satire doesn't require the restraint, I think, that some other kinds of writing requires. And so maybe that could be seen as like, I don't know, not as ambitious. I don't know, but this is ambitious. Maybe that's not the right word, but yeah, I think restraint, the fact that it's not as necessary to be as restrained in certain aspects could be held against it.
Yeah, I will say that I don't think it will not make the shortlist, but for similar reasons, if they feel like the satire is maybe an easy way out or something like that. However, British literary tradition is so steeped in so many types of satire. I feel like the judging panel is going to be like, no, this is sort of one of our things.
Yeah.
But for a man who is so beloved to writers, I wish more people read him, if that makes sense. So
I think they will now.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, he was now shortlisted for the Pulitzer and longlisted for the Booker. Like, come on, people. Like, come on. So the next book, so I really enjoyed almost all, I enjoyed all of this list, but there were 3 books that I was just kind of like scratching my head a little bit on how they made the list. And Booth by Karen Joy Fowler is one of them. The sort of fictional retelling of the life of John Wilkes Booth, the assassinator of Lincoln, told from the point of view of 3 of his family members. I personally felt this book was bogged down in too much research. I felt like at times it just became a research paper versus an actual narrative. And I love Karen Joy Fowler, so I was sad to see that. She's a great writer. There's a lot of really great writing in this book. But it's this one's sort of, I'm confounded a little bit, other than she's been on the shortlist before. I was not exactly sure. Your thoughts on this one?
Okay, so I liked it. It's probably my least favorite of the entire list. Of a list though that I liked every single book I read. Like there are none that I didn't like. But I would say that this is on the bottom. I also I listened to it on audio, and based on conversations that I've had with people and after hearing your thoughts on it, I think that might have helped my experience with it feel less like I think that also because it's so big, if I were reading it like the actual book, I might have gotten bored a little easier, whereas listening to it, some of the more boring parts, like I zoned out a bit.
Yeah.
And just jump back in, and I think that helped. And also I know that the two characters that I really liked the most are the two characters that or one of them at least is one of the characters that she really had to like make up. Like, yes, like she existed, but that character she is the most fictional, which I guess also I feel like speaks a little bit to what you're saying as well.
Absolutely. I think the one where she took the most license was where she was most successful. When she attempted to be truer to historical fact, she sort of got lost a little bit. But it really fits in with the theme of this long list in regards to like events in history or events in a culture that really changed the world. So yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if it made the short list, but you know, I'm never one to say that it won't, but I think that it's just not her strongest novel. So yeah. Okay, so the next book I think I'm really interested because this is a strange little book, and that's Trico Walker by Alan Garner. Again, this is another book that is not out yet in the United States. I have no idea how to describe this book. I know that Alan Garner is like a revered YA author in England, and I know that this is, I think, his first novel for adults, but it sort of felt like a YA novel, if I'm being honest. The story of a young boy with I think he has a lazy eye. He lives by himself, and a man shows up. And yeah, what did you get out of this one? What did you think about this one?
I think it's just it's a super playful, not just with like the actual story, but playful with words and sentences, which makes it really challenging, I think, to read. It's really short. It's a really short book, but it's not one that I think that you can like breeze through. You actually have to like think through. It's almost like a thought experiment in a way. Very, very philosophical. But my impression is that like the whole point of it was to kind of think through this idea of like what is real, what is time, like nothing's real or unreal. It's all like what we imagine real and not real to be, and what, you know, living and dead to be, et cetera, et cetera. I know that have you read Lanny by Max Porter?
Yes, and there's a lot
similar vibe.
Yes, yeah. And you know, I know that it's steeped in a lot of like mythology. So I say this is the book I feel like the judges chose for the people of England. I feel like they knew that this book may not connect with everybody else that may read this long list, but they were going to put one book. And, you know, and he's the oldest author to ever be longlisted for the Booker Prize. But there was a lot of empty, and I don't want to say space, I don't know that. There's a lot of jumping here where you as the reader have to put things together, which I was like, I'm not sure how it all goes together. I liked it. I thought it was interesting, but in the end, I didn't know that I connected to it so well. But I will say, if they want to give this man sort of like end of career hoorah, this book could make the short list. I think they could. I don't think it's the strongest book on the list. And I know that we all say that Small Things Like These is the shortest book on the long list ever. This book is shorter. The font is ginormous.
Agreed. And there is a lot of white space on the pages.
Absolutely. So interesting though. You know what I will say about this book? It made me want to go find more Alan Garner.
Yeah, same.
So, and I know he has like one YA book that's like considered canonical British children's fiction. So I think I'm going to try to go find that one. So
yeah, me too.
So the book I hear you finished this morning, and the last book I read on the long list is The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida by Shehan. And I have been practicing Shehan's last name since I knew I was doing this video. Karunatilaka, and I know I'm saying that absolutely incorrect, but he is a Sri Lankan author. This book takes place during the Sri Lankan Civil War. Our main character, right out the bat, we find out that he has been killed. He doesn't really know why. And he has 7 moons before he has to make a decision on whether to stay as a ghost in the earth plane or move on to the next level. This is the book where I had to do the most sort of Googling, because there was a lot about, I knew certain things like I'd heard about in Sri Lankan history, but by no means am I a Sri Lankan historian. But everything I looked up, I found fascinating and horrifying in a lot of ways. But basically he's a photographer. He has this box of photos that will sort of change the world, as he thinks. And he wants to get it into the hands of his friends so it can be released. There's a lot of mythology in this book as well. What did you think? You finished it this morning. What are your gut first thoughts?
So I would say at the midway point, in the beginning, I really liked it. Midway, I struggled a little bit in a similar way to how I struggled with Glory, in that I felt that it was like very dense and could have maybe been edited down a little bit. But I don't even like want to say that, because maybe once I think about it a little more, I will see why all of that was necessary. But the last 100 pages or so, I absolutely loved, and it like zoomed very high up on my list. I really loved the last 100 pages. And I anticipate it being one of the books that sticks with me.
For me, it was a book where in the beginning I struggled a little bit, and then I started to get into it. I agree with you. I felt like the middle became maybe a little repetitive, but I knew what he was trying to do. But as a reader, I felt like it became a little cumbersome. And then like the last 100 pages, it turns into like almost like this thing you can't stop turning the pages on. And it was very interesting, this idea of what happens after death, what choices we can make, and this idea of sort of juggling that with the choices you make in real life. He has some beautiful, beautiful writing in this book.
Yes.
This made me definitely want to pick up Chinaman. That's his first book, right? Chinaman, because clearly the man is talented. But Sri Lanka's got some stuff going on. Like it was, I mean, like the trees in a lot of ways, the horror of the situation is always present. Even though you may not be talking about it, it's there. And I would start like just going through the Wikipedia thing where you read something and you click a link and you click a link, and it just got more and more horrifying. I did that. Go ahead.
Oh, it's interesting to how each of, with this recurring theme of like really dark times in different countries' histories, how the different authors approach it. Like Glory and the Trees are both satire, but they are different kinds of satire, and have different kinds of effects. Whereas this, I felt like what I really, and I love when books do this, which also I think played into why I ended up really liking it, is when the beauty of the language and the writing and the atmosphere created cuts through that darkness in such an interesting way, that I really appreciated.
And I am always a fan of the sort of unlikable narrator, or the character that you realize has, for lack of a better term, issues. And Maali definitely makes some life choices that I would not make. And, he is not a hero in any sort of common definition of the word, but he's really engaging.
Oh yeah.
And I think for what the author is doing with him as a character, that he made him as engaging to the reader as to the people in the book he was interacting with, was rather phenomenal. So this is another book, I just don't see it not making the short list. I can't figure out why, other than I do think maybe the middle could be condensed a little bit. I never felt like there was part of this where I was like, oh, this went off the rails, or you know, or anything like that. And the writing, I mean,
yeah,
next level, really.
Especially at the end too. I think the writing got better and better as the book moved forward. A lot of times books like start off really strong with the writing and then they let go a bit, but I think this was the opposite. It just kept on getting stronger and stronger.
Well, yeah, as the character became more comfortable in what he was doing, the book became more complex and comfortable with its language, I think. So, I mean, that definitely, yeah, I think this is one of those books. One, I hope it comes out in the US. And two, I think it will stick with people in a lot of ways.
Definitely.
So we're going to transition into the book where I think is not going to stick with people. And that is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. And I will tell you, I've already reviewed this book on my channel and people come for you if you don't like this book. This is set in Ireland in the mid 1980s. Our main character delivers fuel for heat, so like wood or coal. And it has to do with an event in history. I think they're called the Magdalena. I can't remember the next word, if it's event or whatever, I can't believe it, trials maybe. But basically he goes to deliver to this nunnery. He finds these young girls, realizes something's going on and wants to make a change. And my problem was the book never actually talks enough about the historical event that if I did not read the acknowledgements, I, as a person not from Ireland, would never have known. I needed that. And then once I read more about it, it informed the story. I needed this book to be longer. I needed more development. I needed more character. And a lot of people don't feel that way. What did you feel about this book?
I really liked it just because it ticked off a lot of boxes that I enjoy. I love Christmas. I love cozy British,
Yes.
Irish, small town village vibes. And so I was just very drawn to the atmosphere. I also find books about that like explore Catholicism very interesting, having been raised Catholic. And I found the main guy's like trajectory interesting as well, especially the ending.
Yeah. I mean, I think that he is a powerful character that I just wanted to spend more time with, I think. But when I compare it to the rest of the long list, I don't sit here and think, oh, I think about that book. Like, there's definitely books that I think about more. But you know what? I think she is rather revered. Like, people are big Claire Keegan fans. So I'm interested to see. I don't know that it will, but I think because of the next book we're going to talk about, I don't think it will. Yeah, it was interesting. A lot of people really love it. I think it's a fast read. I think that if you are looking for the one book on the Booker long list to read and you don't have a lot of time, it's the one to do it. But we'll see. We'll see. So
I don't think it'll make the short list. Yeah,
I don't think it will make the short list either, because I don't think that there will be many like repeat sort of narratives. But the next book we're going to talk about, you and I both expected to see on this long list when we read it. And that's The Colony by Audrey Magee. This is out from FSG here in the United States, so you can get your hands on it. I want to say just a second, I think this cover is brilliant. Sometimes I think covers make no sense to the book that's inside. This cover makes such sense to this book. So, this takes place in on an Irish island in the late 1970s. And it is a man who goes there to paint. And he sort of goes there and he's going to this last bastion of Irish cultures. They speak the Irish language. And he's sort of invested there. And then along comes a French linguist who is very upset that he's there disrupting, because he is really invested in keeping this language alive. It's about, it's so on the nose a little bit about the idea of colonialism and taking over other cultures. But I will say that there was some of the most beautiful writing when it came to the point of view of the artist that I have in the whole long list to me. I know you really love this book, so tell everybody why.
Yeah, no, I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. I loved it because of the writing. And the writing was just very captivating. The writing is what drew you onto the island. Like the story is great, but the way in which she brings the reader to the story via these different forms of writing, because there are different like forms of writing that take place in the book, because there's the anthropologist guy, and his parts are much more academic in a way, and that is extremely fascinating. I will say that as I've sat with it longer, I have like found parts that I guess have like questioned a little more, but I still really, really loved it, and would be happy if it made the shortlist.
I agree. It was one of those books that, and because it's on a long list, you're intended to do this, right? You're comparing it to others. It didn't hold up for me against some of the other narratives as well. I did think the switch into the anthropologist's writing, though I understand the purpose, wasn't as engaging as the artist himself. I do think this is maybe one of the most perfect endings, because for what she wanted to say and how it worked out in this idea of colonialism was that very, very powerful to me. And I think this one, I think it will make the shortlist. I don't know that I can't see it not. And I think that they're only going to pull one of these sort of Irish narratives. And if I were to pick one, I would pick this one over the other. And she's been shortlisted or longlisted before?
I don't think either. She was for the women's prize.
Oh, women's prize. I keep doing that, mixing my prizes up. I think I did that in the last video.
The British prize.
But I will say, this was an author that I didn't know anything about before I read this book. And I was just like, I'm blown away. Like, I'm so interested to read her last book. And I really am invested in her as a writer now. So, okay. So the next book, I think, is the other book that you are getting to starting today. And that's Maps of Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer. This is a debut novel. She is a young British writer. And this is the story of a family of three, a husband, a wife, and a daughter, who are dealing with a mother's reoccurrence of a cancer diagnosis. And in the book, there are sections where cancer talks about the invasion of her body and taking over this body. This book flips in time, basically giving us the historical, where the mother grew up. She grew up in a very religious family. We learn about her relationships, and then we get what she's going through with her family and what her daughter and husband are going through as she deals with cancer. This book surprised me. This was my throwaway. I really thought, okay, that's the book I'll read, and I won't even think about it again. I bawled my eyes out at the end of this book. I feel like this book has one of the bigger hearts of all of the narratives. And it does interesting things with structure. I think this book is so very, very good. I don't know if it's good enough to make the short list, but I am really glad that she's on the long list, because I think she is so talented. And she juggles a lot of really tough topics in this book. Yeah, I loved it. So I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it when you read it. I don't think it will make the short list. I just think the competition is so rough or tough, maybe. But have you heard anything about it or
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because well, I feel like this, out of any of the books, I think this one has the biggest like hardcore super fans, like people like really, really, really love it. But there are people who like just think it's okay, or who it doesn't work for them. But it just really has a lot of people who are like, this is the number one. And for that reason, I was thinking that maybe it would make the short list, but I haven't read it. So, what am I to,
Yeah, I mean, if it does, I will be very, very happy, because it's a book that really touched me in a lot of ways and made me sort of think about mortality. And I'm getting to that age where my parents are getting to that age, and you start thinking about that sort of stuff, and it just really hit home, I think, in a lot of ways for me. So yeah, I really, really loved it, and it was a book that I didn't expect to even think about, and so thank you, long list, for even introducing me. So So the next book on the list is Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. And I've got to say, one, there's a lot to say about this book. So I'm going to let you start because we sort of talked about it last time, but you hadn't finished it. What are your thoughts now that you finished it? And what do you think about its chances?
Sure. So my initial reaction after finishing it, and this is the other, so I listened to 2 on audio. I listened to Booth and then I listened to Nightcrawling. And I just like was really, really impressed with the emotional depth that this book delivers, and also, but not just emotional depth. Like, it's not just like playing with your feelings. I think that Mottley does a really, really impressive job at exploring like the human condition for such a young person. I don't know, like she has a very strong sense of like getting into people, like her character's humanity. And that's what I really liked. I have since reading it and listening to it on audio, I have seen people say that they feel like it's overwritten. I could gauge that it's very poetic by listening, but I think that I missed that part of it by listening to it and not seeing the words. And for that reason, I would say maybe I don't think it's going to make the short list. But personally, like on like my appreciation of like the experience it gave me, I would put it towards the top.
So interesting. So this takes place in Oakland, California, which is 45 minutes from where I live. I've lived here. I remember the event that this book is based around when it occurred. So I thought that was rather interesting because there's very few like socially relevant things that go on in my zone that I usually get to just like, okay, there we go. I agree with a lot of people. Now that I've thought back, I thought it was a fantastic read. I flew through it, page turning. I think the main character is completely engaging, and I felt for her with every decision she had to make. It does seem at times it's like that young writer trying to show us how pretty she can write. So I do think that gets away a little bit in her storytelling. And there are also a couple of strands of plot that sort of peter out. Like she didn't know how to bring every piece together. But I mean, congratulations on introducing the world to an amazing new talent. Like, as she grows in sophistication, I only imagine her becoming a better and better writer.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of those things, too, when it comes to the short list. You have to compare it the books that it's up against. And I think that this book and The Trees are fighting for the same spot on the short list. And The Trees, to me, is a stronger narrative. And if you take debuts, I thought Maps was a better overall book than this one. That being said, I loved the book and I would recommend it to a ton of people. I had my friend Ryan said it's a very Oprah book. Like it definitely has that sort of connection with the Oprah readers. And I can see that. I think that there's a lot to talk about. And she's amazing. So I'm really excited. But yeah, Nightcrawling was interesting. I don't think anyone thought it would be on this list.
Nope. I would have
never in our lives. But good for them. Good for them for surprising us. So, okay. So next, we only have 2 books left, interestingly enough. After Sappho by Selby, Wynn, Schwartz. So after our conversation, I did some research. She is a professor at Berkeley, which is right up the way from us. She's very inventive in her writing. She's won a lot of awards for sort of these prizes that deal with style. So this is sort of I don't even know an investigation into women through history and their love affairs and how they've changed politics and literature and the world. I would argue it's almost narrative nonfiction versus fiction, and I'll let you talk in a minute. All I'll say is this book has some of the most beautiful writing on this list. Like some of her turns of phrase are, I mean, if I were a highlighter, this book would be highlighted like through and through. And when we got to like Virginia Woolf and Paris and Sackville West or whatever, I was invested. But yeah, this is a very interesting book. What are your thoughts?
Did you like it overall, or?
Oh yeah, no, definitely very strong. Like, I did find it a bit hard to get into in the beginning, especially because a lot of the characters in the beginning continue to change their names, which I understand the reason, but I couldn't always follow who I was talking about. But the research she did into sort of the lesbian world was phenomenal. She just, and this was another book. I was Wikipediaing everybody. They're fascinating people.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with a lot of what you said, especially about the writing. It's probably my favorite writing on the long list. It's like beautiful. Like, it's beautiful. Some of it's a little bit hard to get in, hard to penetrate, but like in a way that kind of like, I don't know, like I could get off to. Like, I just like I really like that. And I also like felt like the names were confusing, and I don't know if this was intentional or not. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but I did feel like that helped me think about it as a chorus of voices rather than just as individuals speaking. So they kind of did just end up like blending into my head a little bit. And I think that that's what helped me like see through the entire narrative, just like see where it was going. So yeah, like this was probably one of my favorites. This was probably my favorite female authored book on the list, I think. And one interesting though point, I really liked the beginning stuff about learning about like Italy. I thought that was really interesting because it like takes place at around a time where like my ancestors were like leaving Italy to come to the United States, but I don't really know much about that time. I don't really know much about like Italian history at all. So it was really interesting to like learn about that. And so that also hooked me in right away, and pushed me forward.
For me, this is a book that if it were to make the shortlist and win, I would be like, I'd understand, because it does something that I have never read a book like it before. And it is a book that's playing with form and that line between fiction and nonfiction, but also writing that is just at times otherworldly, and so powerful. So I would love for it to make the short list. I mean, and if it won, I think it would have a lot to say. I don't know that the booker's ready. I don't know that they're ready to put the crown on this book, but I am super excited that they put it on the long list, because it definitely shows that they're looking at things differently, at least this judging panel. So, and if you are looking for a book where you just want to see someone play with language, this is the book for you.
Absolutely.
And really championing the lesbian experience in a way that I haven't seen in literature. So I really, really, really liked it. So yeah. Okay. Well, last but not least, and this is why I'm a little surprised to hear that was your favorite book by a female author on this list.
Well, this is my second.
By Elizabeth Strout. I will say this, and I'll let you go on about this book, but every time I read Elizabeth Strout, I say, why don't I read more? Because she's so brilliant. But this is the third book, right? In what's about to be a quartet.
Yep.
And yeah, tell us your thoughts.
Expound I'm like, it's hard because I'm just biased. Like I will never say anything bad about Elizabeth Strout. Like I just, she's just so comforting to me. And it's okay. So I want to go back to what we were talking about in the beginning about like a sense of place, because like I don't necessarily, as someone who lives like right near New York City and has been here my entire life, like I don't really typically enjoy reading things that are set in New York City, and I don't typically pay attention to that. But like after you saying, bringing up that point that like these books really are like in the places that they take place in, like this is so New York, like, and it's actually interesting too, because typically when we read about New York, we get like either like a more working class kind of narrative, or the really wealthy, like Trust, right? And this is like middle class, upper middle class New York City, which is kind of seems like difficult to wrap your mind around, because like that's like seems like the most, yeah, I don't know. It's just like how do you live in have a family and live in New York City, like at that in that I don't know, but yeah, I love it. And I love how, you know, she explores relationships and marriage in a way that's, I don't think you see a lot in literature, and she does so with like so much tenderness, that I just love.
Yeah, for me, and this is a thing where it's sort of like, this is not in any way meant to sound negative, but she is just so simple sometimes in her writing that it is amazing what she's doing. But you can sometimes lose sight of how brilliant she is because it's so
absolutely
delicate, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about books that make the shortlist, for me, this is one that I think has to be on the shortlist. But that being said, I also wonder if in its simplicity, they'll feel like it's just maybe too simple. Mm-hmm. But if you again, this is a book where if you want to read this in a book club and dissect her ideas on relationships and marriage and relationships post-divorce, mm-hmm. It's fascinating. And she's another one that she just takes she can do a sentence and you could sit on it for a mm-hmm. very long time.
Some of the things she says just like stick with me, like even in her other books, like, you know, certain lines that her characters say are so unique and quirky that I just like will always remember them.
Yeah, and speak of characters, she's one of the few books on this list where the character of Lucy is so realized, and it should be. I mean, this is the third book she's written about her, correct? But I feel like I could go up on the street and meet her. Like, I just feel like she's so real, mm-hmm. Which is brilliant, I think, in a lot of ways, because it makes it more powerful, mm-hmm. what she's going through and doing. So yeah, I think it's an amazing book. So
me too.
Cool. Okay, well, that is all of the books on the long list. Now it's time to announce. I think we may have very similar shortlists.
Yeah, so I have a question. Are we going for our shortlist that we predict or our shortlist that we want?
So I thought about this a little bit. I think we do what we think will actually be on the shortlist.
Okay.
Because being honest, my shortlist personally would be very different.
Okay.
Very, very different. But I definitely, that being said, I think the shortlist that will happen is very powerful. So I'm not discounting any of it, but so go ahead. What do you think is the first book that's going to make the shortlist? Totally agree. Have that one on my pile here too. I don't see it not making the shortlist.
No, me neither. Next, you want me to go next?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll just have you go. Yeah, I agree. I don't see Trust not making the shortlist too. I will say, though, I'm interested to know if there will be as many Americans on the shortlist as I think there will be. So mm-hmm. that's my only thing. Yeah. And my shortlist doesn't have a British writer. So I'm interested to see if that will actually wind up happening too. Mm-hmm. So, okay, what's your next? What's your third? Totally agree. I think, and that's the book that I think, I don't know. I just think a lot of people, once they read it, are going to think about it for a very long time. Mm-hmm. For a very long time. Yeah. So I'm assuming this one's
what if we're right? What if we get it right?
I know. So book number 5. Totally agree. I just feel like Elizabeth Strout deserves to be on the short list, and people deserve to see how brilliant she is in person. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, this is the one I think is very up in the air.
So I have so those 5 I'm pretty solid on. And then the last spot I have 3 that I'm between. But I will just and this might be the one that we is not the same for us, but I'm gonna go with this.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Because we get British and the young debut with it.
Yes, that's true. And I would love that. I'm going to go with The Colony. I think The Colony will make the short list. I think that it has something to say that the booker would like to discuss further.
These are my three that I was between. The Colony, after Sappho, and Maps. I think it's one of these.
So my dark horse will be Trico Walker. It's phenomenally British. It's the opportunity to reward an author renowned, and I think that it definitely is a weird book. So that's my dark horse. But overall, this is a very strong list of books. I do not envy the judges at all.
No, not at all. It's
okay.
I mean, they did it to themselves by, creating a long list that's so different.
And so good. Like, sometimes you see they throw in a book and it's different, but that, right away, there's just no way, right? So I'm still surprised. Maybe they just thought it did something for them, but whatever. So of your short list, what do you think's gonna take home the big prize?
See, this is where it gets tricky, because I would say this, but are they going to give it to a gay man 3 years in a row? Like, I don't know, like, it's just like, so if you think about that, then it's like, maybe not, but also it's like a different country. It's Sri Lanka. But then I would say Glory.
I think Glory's my front runner too. I think that I think that the author does something that they are really going to appreciate. Different, funky, weird. Personally, I think Trust should win. I think it's the strongest book in the 6 that I chose. I think people will talk about Trust for years to come.
Okay, yeah.
But again, are they going to give it to a white bald man 3 years in a row? I don't know that they're going to do that either. But I loved Damon Galgot's The Promise last year, but I did not expect it to win. So
no, me neither. Yeah, same. Or no, I did expect it to win. Sorry. But if you're thinking of like the repeat of like identity politics, then maybe not. But I think it was just too good to.
Well, that was his 3rd time being shortlisted too, but that's a digression for another video. So, well, Bernie, I want to thank you. We'll come back, I guess, to discuss the shortlist and see how right we were.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you don't know, the shortlist is actually being announced on Tuesday, September 6th. I don't know what time, but it's being sometime while we're
7 p.m. in the UK.
Okay, there you go. So it'll be middle of the day here in the United States. So this video will be going up tomorrow, which is the Sunday before. So we will be surprised like y'all. Thank you, Bernie. I think we did a great job breaking down this list.
Yeah, we did. Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
It was really fun. So until next time, Bernie and I wish you happy reading, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye, everyone.